Thank you, Connie, for those kind words. Had a great time in the Philippines, just gleaning from each other and getting to know one another. And this is where I learned about her hubby's good work and bought one or two of his books and read those, and just being able to network. And then we've spoken together at a couple of other conferences. So I admire Connie. And then, of course, Paul Ray has done so much good work over the years, 17 years as the editor of NEASB, our professional journal, and Randa Yonkers, and the pedigree here at Andrews runs deep. So we admire you guys. Our organization, the Associates for Biblical Research, goes way back here. Our founder, David Livingston, did his PhD here, and so our roots are pretty deep in this soil. And Henry Smith, the gentleman here in the purple shirt, is, I think, an incoming PhD. I don't know if it's official yet, but it looks like he's an incoming PhD student here at Andrews. So we love the work that you guys do. We use the Modern Plains protocols, brag about you all the time, reference your publications. So just counted a real joy to be here, especially for the Horn lectureship, because Siegfried Horn, of course, left a great legacy behind that we see not only in his name, but in the artifacts in the museum and, of course, in many of your lives. So thank you very much. I want to introduce a couple of my ABR colleagues to you, and that is Scott Lancer, who's the Executive Director for Associates for Biblical Research, and then Henry Smith. So Scott and Henry, would you stand and be recognized, please? Thank you guys for coming. And with that, let's talk about Shiloh. My new favorite verse in the Bible is Jeremiah 7:12. Go now to Shiloh. See what I did there. So that's exactly what we want to do tonight. And so we've got this PowerPoint hooked up in a really cool way. So hopefully I can manage the technology and you'll enjoy it. My goal is to talk for 30 or 40 minutes and then to do some Q&A with you at the end. So this is the product of our work after 3 seasons of excavation at Shiloh. It's hard to believe that we're getting ready for season 4. We've been blessed to have very large teams, the largest groups in Israel over the last several years. And so this has enabled us to do some things like wet sifting 100% of our material, which is slow. It slows us down, but it also increases our efficiency tremendously. But this is field H1 at Shiloh. So this is our big MB wall here. This is the wall that the Israelites saw when they arrived at Shiloh. Remember that God had told Joshua and the Israelites, you're going to live in houses you didn't build. You're going to occupy cities that you did not construct. So what did they see when they arrived? The yellow stuff. And then the purple is the iron one material. And so this is indisputably the period of the tabernacle at Shiloh. We also have a good amount of LB material. Now you have to remember that in the late Bronze Age, they're continuing to use the MB infrastructure, those storage rooms and the storage walls and so forth. And we have a lot of pottery from the LB period, which I'll be talking about some later, which is important at Shiloh. Then we have New Testament period or late Hellenistic, early Roman in the orange, and then some Byzantine in the green. So, of course, ultimately we have to figure all this out, which walls are from which time period and how do we date it and so forth. So this is the outcome of 3 seasons of work. And I want to draw your attention to the purple building, this monumental building from the Iron Age, and we'll be coming back to that and talking about it because that is significant, and you'll notice that it's orienting east-west. Now let's make no mistake about it. Shiloh is important because of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Joshua sets up the tabernacle at Shiloh. In my view, this is around 1399 BC, somewhere thereabouts. They've come out of Israel, they've wandered in the wilderness, they've had a conquest of 6 or 7 years, and now the tabernacle is erected at Shiloh with a sacrificial system. The word I want you to think about is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude. Do we find in the material culture what we would expect to find when we're reading an ancient text, in this case, the biblical text, where we're reading about something that's happening at a certain time period? Do we find a concomitant system that matches that? For example, the storage rooms that line the inside of this fortification wall, those go the entire perimeter, which is about 5 acres inside the walled city. There is no other site in Israel or Jordan, to my knowledge, where you have storage rooms lining the interior the whole way. So why would you have that at Shiloh? Well, if you have a sacrificial system that's taking place there, people are bringing tithes regularly to Shiloh, then how do you think they tithed in biblical times? Did they go to tabernacle.org and make a secure online donation, or write a check, or cash, coins? None of those things exist. So how do they tithe? They bring commodity, bushels and barrels and so forth. And so what do we find? Storage jars inside these storage rooms from the period of the Mishkan, the period of the tabernacle at Shiloh. So we'll delve into that. But we also have an incredible amount of bone evidence that I want to talk about tonight that is very interesting. We have some monumental structures from that time period and some very special artifacts that point to the cultic system at Shiloh and what makes it unique. Now, of course, when you begin a dig, you have to lay out a grid. And so this is our particular field. So this is a truncated grid. But, of course, you have it's alphanumeric with the numbers across the top, the letters across the top, the numbers down the side. In Israel, we use a 5x5 grid. Many times we're leaving a balk on the north and on the east. Not always. In Jordan, we used to use a 6x6 meter grid. Is that what y'all use in Jordan? It's kind of the standard in Jordan. You've got a tall in Jordan, a tell in Israel, 6 meter grid in Jordan, 5 meter in Israel. So you have all these little nuances. But anyway, this is our field H1, and this is how we keep track of everything. Exactly where does something come from in that square? What is the elevation? What locus do we assign it to? And ultimately, each locus then is assigned to a stratum so that we can begin to understand the history of the site. And if you look up to the top of the picture, you can see our white van and then our wet sifting facility and our headquarters. And then we're in mud bricks. We were practicing making mud bricks. We weren't very good at it the first year, but so we just spelled that AVR up at the top. It's the best we could do. Now here's a close-up. You're zooming in on these storage rooms. As you get deeper into these storage rooms, the stones in the walls get much bigger and the pottery gets much older, logically. So the deeper you're going, the older the pottery is getting. So the foundational phase at Shiloh is MB2, Middle Bronze II. So let's say around 1750 BC. The first fortifications are built about 100 years later in what we would call MB2C or MB3. And we have the collared rim jars on top of the Middle Bronze Age storage jars. And we have some examples of both of these that you can look at after the lecture tonight as well. Now, all of this is, of course, covered over with a mound of debris and mixed in. We've got Islamic material and Byzantine material, and it's all intermixed. And so what we're ultimately hoping to do is to then move into a clean context. We invested in wet sifting from the outset. Now, I worked, 12, 15 years ago, I spent 2 years working in Jerusalem as a supervisor on the Temple Mount Sifting Project. And it's there, working with Dr. Barkai, that I became sold on the value of wet sifting, because I began to see that there were things we had been throwing away that had great value within them. And so I purposed at that time that when I had the opportunity, we were going to really full-scale employ wet sifting. And so some of you know that that's been an issue out there in archaeology. We should go back to the old dump piles at Megiddo and places like that, and that they're going to be full of archaeological material. Well, you know what? They were right. And so we actually did it. And I haven't published this yet, but we're the first ones to go back to a previous dig's dump and then to sift it and then to wet sift it. And it is full of glyptic remains. Cylinder seals and scarabs and coins and beads, and it is rich. We all, archaeologists, have been throwing away much of the evidence. And not because we were intentionally being dummies, but that's all we had, okay? We were working with it. The truth is that our dump piles have much of the evidence that we were searching for, and so sometimes maybe even critical evidence. Why does that matter? Okay, so an earlier dig at Shiloh, you have an inscription. It's actually an Egyptian figurine, and it says on the Egyptian figurine, Isis bless the temple of broken inscription. So the critical word is missing. Now you're thinking, what are you doing with an Egyptian figurine with Isis mentioned at Shiloh? I thought that's where the Israelites were worshiping Yahweh. Read the text. They were also apostatizing. They were also syncretizing. They were worshiping Yahweh along with other gods, and that's what we call verisimilitude. It is described in the text. We find it in the material culture. It's those little finds that wet sifting enables us to recover, and I'm going to show you some of those tonight. So from the very outset, we were committed to doing this, and it's, I believe, paying great dividends. As an evangelical working in archaeology, a highly scientific and highly professional field, we have to be on top of our game. If I make a mistake, it's because I'm an evangelical. Someone else makes a mistake, well, we all make mistakes. It's no big deal. But you know what? I have embraced that. That's forced us to be excellent. It's forced us to be better, to be on top of our game. Not that we're any better than anyone else, I don't mean that. But it's forced us to be excellent and to really strive for that. There was an article, we've had about 1,000 news stories on Shiloh in the last 3 years. And that's everything from Fox News to the New York Times to CBN and CNN and TBN and every news source you can imagine has covered what we're doing. Quite frankly, Shiloh is big news. Did God have a house? Did he dwell? Was there a biblical sacrificial system? Do we have a reliable biblical text? These are big issues that people really care about. And in my view, the sacrificial system answers the most basic of all human questions. Like, who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Can I restore fractured relationships? Like, because of sin, I fracture my relationship with God vertically and with others horizontally. Is there a means by which we can restore broken relationships? Well, the sacrificial system did that. Well, in these news stories, we have an opportunity not only to talk about the scientific archaeology, but they happen to know that I'm also a believer, and so they're curious to know, how does one integrate one's faith into this? And there's someone by the name of Israel Finkelstein, you may have heard of, excavated at Shiloh in the 1980s, and so they're always wanting to juxtapose our views, and that's just fine by me, because that is exactly what I want to do too. Very happy to engage in that arena of ideas. So when the Times of Israel ran a story 2 years ago that said, I think verbatim, while Stripling and his team do rigorous scientific archaeological research, he lies outside the mainstream of Israeli archaeology in that he takes the Bible as a serious archaeological text. So I saw 3 accusations within that statement. And as I thought about it, I was guilty on all charges. Number 1, I was guilty of doing rigorous scientific archaeological research. Number 2, I was guilty of lying outside the mainstream of Israeli archaeology. If that means that you don't believe that there is any historical veracity to the biblical text, then that's true. And number 3, I take the Bible as a serious historical document. And so that's the world that we are engaged in and that you guys are engaged in. And it's a dynamic world. I mean, we just are super excited about the opportunity to engage in this arena of ideas. So speaking of media, I want to show you some of the work that's being done. And so we created our own news network this year. It's called Shiloh Network News. We had people watching all over the years. And if you want to go back and watch these, you can go to our website, digshiloh.org. Speaking of Shiloh, we lost our dog this last year, and it was very hard on my wife. She was depressed from this whole thing. So I was at a conference, and our secretary at the school messaged me and said, we have this puppy that just showed up at the school. Beautiful dog, looks like he's half German Shepherd, half Husky, he doesn't have any tags. What should I do? I said, well, post something on social media and see if somebody, claims this dog. And then I sent the link over to my wife. About 4 hours later, my wife sends a picture back to me, and this dog is sleeping in my bed. Now, I'm in Denver, you understand, at a conference, and this dog is sleeping in my bed. Well, I still have to sign off on this deal when I get home, okay? So when I walk in the door, the first thing she says to me is, I named him Shiloh. So even my dog's name is Shiloh. So anyway, we'll look at a little bit of a video here. You can see the storage rooms. It seems to me that the storage rooms are clustered into units of 3. And of course, the Danish did the first work at Shiloh. From 22 to 32, they did 4 seasons. In 2 years, in 2022, we're planning a huge celebration, Shiloh 2022. It'll be the 100th anniversary of breaking ground at Shiloh. So they worked for 4 seasons. Hans Kier, by the way, the director at Shiloh, died right here, or became mortally ill right there in the Red Square working. Took him to Jerusalem. He never recovered. Shut down the dig. If somebody starts giving me a hard time, I send them over to that square to work. For a while. Then, of course, Finkelstein came along for 4 seasons in the 80s, but still less than 5% of the site was excavated. And they had only done, it's philosophically my view, that if we're doing small areas, we're subject to misinterpretation. And so what I wanted to do was open up a broader area to connect the work that the Danish had done, that Finkelstein had done, and open up a broader area, bring it all down, so that hopefully with new methodology we could really understand the story of ancient Shiloh. All right, so this comes out next week. It's called Bible Lands Passages. You'll be able to see it all over the place. So if you're not connected with me in social media, let's connect, and then you can follow along with all this stuff. But this is one of the documentaries that we filmed this last summer.
I came to Israel to document the evidence. I wanted to see the archaeological and geographical data. And what I found was incredible. It was faith-confirming. Cities, artifacts, tombs, tunnels, mountains, and valleys. It's all there just like the Bible says. My investigation led me to a place deep within the heart of the West Bank, where one of the top archaeological artifacts of the year was unearthed. A place where over 3,000 years ago, a hurting and desperate woman came looking for God. A place that Scripture says, go now to see it.
We're within a few yards of where Hannah connected with God, and that's like a nexus, you know.
For only a few short seasons now, the Associates for Biblical Research have been carefully excavating, looking for any clues that might elucidate the history of this storied place. Not only are they systematically exposing the Canaanite wall that enshrined the city, they are also carefully examining thousands of pieces of pottery to not only assist in determining what civilizations inhabited this place, but also to see if some type of inscription or artifact might remain which would verify what the Bible says about an Israelite occupation at the site.
Our responsibility is to accurately record the data. We're talking about, do we have a biblical text that is reliable? And then this is a flavor of Shiloh Network News.
Welcome to Shiloh Network News with Dr. Scott Stripling.
This is Scott Stripling reporting from Shiloh. We have our team setting up our excavation squares behind me, ready for 5 weeks of work here at ancient Shiloh. We've just also wrapped up our tour. Some of our touring group has now gone home, others have stayed with us for the excavation at Shiloh. Today, our first day of the dig, we're really cleaning and reorganizing our squares and beginning the excavation process. But tomorrow we'll be deep into these Bronze Age storage rooms, dealing with material from the Amorite culture, the Israelite culture, Second Temple period, and even on into Islamic times. So we're excited to have you following along with us on Shiloh Network News. All right. Now this picture I love. Let's imagine that you decide to come with me on a dig this summer. Just let yourself go there for just a moment, okay? Let my voice just wash over you. So you're going to come with me on an excavation, and we're going to get up at 4 a.m. for breakfast. And we're going to depart from the hotel at 4:59, wheels up on the bus. We're going to head out to Shiloh. We're going to get our praise on. We're going to worship on the way out there. We're going to have a devotion. And by the time you arrive at Shiloh, about 30 minutes later, your Advil have kicked in by then. Your caffeine, or those of you who drink caffeine, has kicked in by then. So, you know, you're feeling good, you're hydrated, you got your praise on, you've read your scripture, you get off the bus, and you look up and you see the sun coming over the Transjordanian mountains, and you're like, yes, I'm at ancient Shiloh. Joshua was here, Hannah was here, Elkanah was here, Eli was here. This is really, really good. And so you can join, of course, any one of these teams. We work in squares, so each square has a square supervisor, an assistant supervisor, and then maybe 5 to 10 people on a team, depending on exactly what their goals are. And that varies, you know, from day to day as our labor numbers go up and down. But here you can see everybody busy tracking the information and telling the story. Now, our job is to not only, of course, be out there in popular media, we want to do peer-reviewed publications, we want to engage in the academic arena. Just a few weeks ago, I published this article at a peer-reviewed journal in Israel on what many have seen as one of the top finds in Israel over the last few years. And this is a ceramic pomegranate from Shiloh. Now, for you Bible readers, why do we care about pomegranates from Shiloh? Well, the Bible tells us a little bit about pomegranates. So there were 7 fruits when they came into the land. So you're going to have dates and figs and grapes and so forth, list them off, and pomegranates are among that list. But it's only the pomegranate that goes into the presence of God. It's only the pomegranate that is sacred, that even goes into the Holy of Holies. There are hundreds of pomegranates that adorn Solomon's temple, and the hem of the priest's garment, everybody likes to talk about the bells on the hem of the garment, but guess what else was on the hem of the garment? Pomegranates. So what is it about the pomegranate that is sacred, that represents God's nature and God's presence? Because this is really exciting. And so we begin to read. I can't tell you how many pomegranates I've eaten the last 18 months trying to understand this. And I've tried to count the seeds over and over, and I keep losing track. Because you read in the literature that there are 613 seeds in a pomegranate. Of course, we know there's 613 commandments in the Hebrew Bible, and there may be a connection there. But I keep failing at this task every time I try to count them. But that's what you'll read in the literature. Now, this is exciting because you can see that it's to be suspended, and it's only about this big. Now, I cannot tell you that this hung from Eli's robe. Okay, I don't have any proof of that. It may have hung from a cult stand of some kind that represents maybe the tree of life. We simply don't know. But it's right next to a monumental building where we're finding other cultic material from the period of the tabernacle. And so I've dated this to Iron 1, and it's now published, so it's not a secret. We went back into the literature, and I kind of had a gut feeling that the Danish had found pomegranates too, and they didn't recognize them. They didn't know what they had found, and sure enough, went back into the Danish publications, and they had one, but they had called it a stopper and had misidentified it. So I sent a member of my team to Copenhagen and arranged it with the museum. So we were able to get that back, photograph it, measure it, do all the things that we needed for publication. So we published both of them together, those 2 pomegranates from Shiloh, and who knows how many others we will find in the days ahead. These have been found at other sites, but only Levitical sites. So either Shiloh or like Yokneam or other Levitical sites in Israel is the only place that pomegranates have ever been found. So it's very, very interesting as we begin to look at the material culture. See, of course, some of the in-depth analysis. Now, you're looking here at the glacis, and the glacis is, of course, the earthen embankment that surrounds a fortification wall. So we have exposed the glacis. Now, I stand to be corrected, but outside of Ashkelon, which is kind of a different type of glacis, I cannot think of a place that you can go on either side of the Jordan where you can really see an intact glacis, like you walk along the path and look at it. And so ours is. It's big, it's beautiful, and I've even named her. Okay? I actually became obsessed with her, and my wife knows about it. But I mean, I was dreaming about this glacis, so I gave her a name. Her name is Gladys the Gorgeous Glacis. And so when you go along the path, you look over, and there is this with a 35-degree slope going down, and we're still in the process of exposing it. And I want you to look at the red material below. That is the remnant of what completely covered the glacis. That is the mud brick superstructure that was on top of the big fortification wall. So picture Jericho. When the walls of Jericho fall, it's the mud brick superstructure that collapses. We have the exact same thing at Shiloh. Maybe even the same phenomenon brings it down, but it collapses out. So we have about 2 meters of red mud brick material that's covering that entire glacis. And these guys look really happy, don't they? When you come to Shiloh, this is how it is. You just get happy. No, they're really happy because they're getting ice cream this day, Magnum bars in particular, because they've done something really good. They have reached the glacis, so that's why they are celebrating. All right, so this is what it looks like. You can see 5.3 meters wide, this massive wall encircling the side, MB2. And the section of glacis that we've uncovered what we expect to uncover next season. So you can see the pathway. So a tourist will literally, once the signage is there, and we're restoring everything, by the way. All of the walls are going under restoration, so the whole thing will be set up as an incredible archaeological park. But the tourist will be able to literally look over at the glacis and to understand exactly what it is as part of the fortification system. And of course, the drawings help us understand the relationship, say, of the fallen bricks and what the elevations are and so forth, and different walls and different time periods. And I mentioned the amount of media that we have. So almost every day, virtually every day, we have at least one media team that's on site. So it's Israeli media. This is BBC, British Broadcasting, that's doing a documentary this last summer. They chose 2 sites in Israel, Kiryat Yearim and Shiloh. Of course, Finkelstein's now working at Kiryat Yearim, so they're able to juxtapose these views like they would like to. But this is what's going on daily. So we have the tourist groups that come by, the media that's there, and then in the process, my team is out there rocking it. They're doing this incredible work, and then we have the opportunity to then tell this story to the world. So it's really neat. This will air not only in Britain, but also in Israel and other countries as well. We found something very interesting at Shiloh. Now, you can see that this is a wall, and by the way, it's a Byzantine wall, and you've got something sticking up in that Byzantine wall, and that's kind of weird. Why do you have that thing sticking up? What do you think that thing is? That's a horn. So this is called secondary usage. So when you've got something from an earlier time period that is repurposed, secondary usage, and so here you've got it clearly, and it was actually Shimon Gibson, like 10 years ago, that was walking through Shiloh and saw that. Now we're finding the same thing. Remember at Beersheba, they found the whole altar had been taken apart, maybe in Hezekiah's reforms. It was in the walls, and they were able to reassemble it. So we then this summer look at what we began to find, and here's one, and here's another. I showed this to Saigatin and others in Israel, experts on 400 altars. They completely agree with me that these are horns of altars. That's pretty big stuff. So now, remember that word verisimilitude? So you've got altar horns, by the way, right next to that monumental building where that pomegranate came from. So now you've got pomegranates, you've got horns from altars, you've got storage rooms. All this is beginning to paint a picture that is very consistent with what you see in the biblical text. Here's another horn. This one was clearly from a burned matrix. And speaking of that burned matrix, we came down upon this last season. I was so excited. This is a plastered floor. Now, why would that excite me? A plastered floor means a sealed locus. So that means everything underneath that floor is undisturbed. So we can date with absolute certainty what is under that. So above the floor, we knew the dates of our pottery. We were very confident about that. So I want to get under that floor, and I predicted what it was going to be underneath there, what the date of the pottery should be, and then if we got clean carbon dates, what those carbon dates would come in at. And so sure enough, you go under the floor level, and we have clear destruction. Here you can see it even thicker destruction. So we were able to get good carbon material and do good carbon dating. And I don't know if you can see the yellow font at the top. I predicted, and I don't know if any of you guys were, I think Henry and Scott, y'all were in on it. So I said, I predict the carbon dates should be about 1075 BC, give or take 20 years. And so I let everybody bet on this. And so they were all over the map. And who ended up winning? Moi. So it was 1060 plus or minus 30. And so it was exactly where we expected it to be. And guess what that synchronizes with? The Philistine destruction of Shiloh. So 1 Samuel 4 never comes out and tells you that the Philistines destroyed Shiloh. The ark's taken from there. You've got the battle at Ebenezer, at Aphek, and so forth. Eli dies, he gets the news, but it doesn't come right out and tell you. Now, Psalm 78 hints that Shiloh is destroyed by the Philistines. But now we have archaeology that matches that. This is what it does. It illuminates the biblical text for us. It doesn't change it. It's just illuminating it so that we can understand it better. So the pottery underneath here, iron 1, okay? So we've got iron 2 right above it. We've got iron 1 right below the floor. We've got good, clean carbon dates. I think you're looking at the Philistine destruction of the site. And of course, you'll recognize Elaine Rittmeyer, probably the world's leading expert on the Temple Mount, who's our dig architect there, and Dr. Mark Hassler, and they're discussing something perplexing. We've got this fortification wall, but there's stones missing in it here. Like, why would there be stones missing? And why is there a patch? Why did the Byzantines come and build a patch to block up this opening? So something interesting that's going on. So they're trying to figure it out. And when we get in there, sure enough, we see that there are stones missing. It sort of seems to form a threshold of some sort. So we want to go over to the other side of the wall, and the season's running out. Was this your square, Tommy, this year? No. Last year it was, the year before. So we want to see the other side to see if we're missing stones, and we are on the other side as well, and we go really deep. The Danish had not even gotten near the bottom of these storage rooms. They thought they were at the bottom. There are over 2 meters still to go below that. And we've got multiple destruction layers in there. Long before the Israelites were there, Shiloh was being destroyed. And of course, we're through pottery and carbon and so forth. We're dating those. Now, what's going on here? Why do we have no glacis in this area? Why are we missing portions of the wall? So one wonders these things at night, okay? What might be the reason for this? And of course, one possibility is that you have a gate, an entrance into the city. The gate of Shiloh has never been found. It's mentioned in the Bible. There's clearly the reason for interest in that. Maybe a postern gate of some kind. And so, if indeed that's what we have, and I don't know yet, I can't prove that, it's just a hypothesis, but the blue, you can see where we're missing the stones, where we have the threshold, and then coming through, and then notice the nearby, we've got a massive socket stone here, and so we're trying to understand this area and understand if we actually have a gate complex or a secondary entrance into the city. I think the main entrance is probably on the south. Here's a close-up look at that big socket stone that's there, and then a smaller upper socket that is nearby. So it seems like something monumental at some point was in this area at Shiloh. And we have also identified what may be a possible northern approach road. So from across the highway, you look across and you can see the outline of what seems to be an approach road that would lead you right to the northern platform, which is where many people, starting with Charles Wilson back in 1866, theorized that the tabernacle was on the northern platform, and it's kind of a popular hypothesis these days. It's not necessarily my hypothesis, but it's tourists really like it, and so the tour guides hate it when I tell people that we don't have proof that that's where the tabernacle was, but it does seem to lead right up to the site coming from the north. There's a yeshiva up at the top of the hill, and that's the modern community of Shiloh that has about 3,000 people who live there. There is a security fence that goes all the way around the modern community and the ancient tell, and that means that we have no vandalism. So after fighting vandalism my entire career, we now have none. We leave our tools in our archaeological squares, if you can imagine that. So it is a blessing. And we're still very early in the dig. We're only 3 seasons in. It's got a long, long way to go. But we're already seeing some fascinating things. Now, I put this in to give you an idea. This is the church that we excavated at Khirbet el-Maqater. Originally a 4th century church, rebuilt as a triapsidal church in the 5th century. So playing with this, Dr. Rittmeyer and I started saying, you know what, that's like the dimensions of the tabernacle, we said. What would happen if we took the dimensions of the tabernacle and superimposed them upon our church at Shiloh? Who would have ever thought in your wildest dreams that Byzantine Christians were seeing themselves as the temple of God? I mean, I guess it shouldn't seem strange to us. Paul and Peter both allude to that sort of language, but that's architecturally. That's a perfect fit on a ratio of 2-to-1, holy to most holy space. Those early believers were seeing themselves, even architecturally, it was a representation of their belief system. So isn't that amazing? We have Byzantine churches that have the exact dimensions of the tabernacle and the temple, which are identical, and now we have this building at Shiloh that has the same dimensions. Of course, we track our data very carefully. Those of you who are archaeologists, of course, recognize this. We're trying to understand the undulation. It would be nice, people say a tell is like a layer cake. Well, not exactly, okay? If layer cakes did this and that, but generally that's the idea. So we're always trying to track our loci from the color and the depth and the change of soil and the pottery and all the different factors that go into that. We try to do as much flotation as we can, from critical loci at least, so that we're gathering biomaterial that we can test as well over time. And so this is then, what our drawings begin to look like. So we're understanding a certain square and then how that square is in relationship to all the other squares around it. And so we try to teach square supervisors, think outside your square, don't just become tunnel vision. How is this matching with what is going on in the rest of the site? Now, speaking of wet sifting, this is what you get when you wet sift. This is called a bula. Anyone ever found one in an excavation? I didn't think so, because it would be almost impossible. The veritable needle in a haystack. You got a little piece of clay. We excavate 2,000 pieces of pottery every day. It means they've got to be washed, analyzed, and we introduced infrared and ultraviolet lighting in the field this summer. We built a lab in the field where this stuff is examined before it's, finished, before the process is finished. So in wet sifting, do you see the fingerprint here? See the fingerprint of the ancient Israelite? Wow. When you see that for the first time, so that comes from wet sifting. It's got the string on it. It's concave. You can see where the string was on the back. You've got just a few letters here. You can see the Ankh there, so it's Egyptian in origin. But there is no way a volunteer can find that in a square. Even if you dry sift, you're just not going to, it's covered with dirt, a tiny piece of clay. But when you wash it, everything changes. Now, all of a sudden, guess how many bula we found this year? 3 bula this year. Never found one before. It's because we're washing the material that we've been throwing away in the past, and we're finding them in the old dump piles as well. In fact, this is from the Finkelstein dump, right here. Now, speaking of scarabs, say the Latin word scarabeo, scarabus, meaning beetle. We all, of course, know this was sacred to the Egyptians. So think about the numbers here. So the Danish did, let's see, 14 weeks of excavation during their seasons, and they found 3 scarabs. Finkelstein did 14 weeks of excavation, 4 seasons, and he found 5 scarabs. 3 plus 5 is 8. We have done 12 weeks of excavation. So altogether, I just gave you the wrong numbers. Altogether, Finkelstein and the Danish did 42 weeks, total week of excavation. 8 scarabs, 42 weeks. We have done 12 weeks of excavation. We do a 5th week of restoration work, but 4 weeks of actual field work. So 4 weeks of excavation, and how many have we found? 8. So we found the same number of scarabs in 12 weeks that it took them 42 weeks to find. That's 3.5 is the ratio. So for every one that was found in the past, we're finding 3.5. Now, what does that tell you is in these old dump piles? A lot of archaeological material. And so why is it so critical that we catch it before it goes to the dump pile? Because we know exactly where it came from. We're tracking it. We know the locus. So now it has great value for dating. Once you've lost the context, the value is greatly diminished. And so we're excited about sharing our technology with anyone that we can, free of charge, so that everybody benefits from what we're doing. Now, a couple of scarabs that stand out. Let me see if I can move that out of the way. Thutmose III, and then we have a very early one right here, and so that's like super early scarab, 13th dynasty, and then the rest are Hyksos. So Thutmose III, 18th dynasty, 15th century BC, in my view, the pharaoh of the oppression. We have his scarab there, and we have the same scarab on Mount Ebal. We have the same scarab at Jericho. Why? Why is his scarab all over the place? Well, we know he conquered Canaan in whatever the year, 1479, 1483, whatever your chronology might be, but thereabouts. And so it shouldn't surprise us that we find evidence of Thutmose III, the most powerful of all the pharaohs, along with Ramesses II. What the scholars and skeptics will often tell you is that these are commemorative scarabs. They can't possibly be from the time of Thutmose III, because that would confirm in many ways the biblical account that these sites are occupied when the Bible says that they were occupied. If they're commemorative scarabs, I'd like some proof of that, because I think they are assuming that the biblical text is guilty until proven innocent. Now, here's the Tutmosis III scarab, and you can see his name there in the middle. There's this cartouche. No doubt. Okay, Tutmosis III, absolutely. And so where does that come from? Right next to where that monumental building is as well. So we've got a real sweet spot there that we are focused on. And here's another scarab from this summer. This one was from wet sifting. Now, what does that mean when I tell you this scarab? And the Tutmosis III scarab is from wet sifting too. When I tell you that, what does that mean? That means if we weren't wet sifting, what would have happened to it? We were as careful as we could be in the square. We dry sifted everything and double checked. And then what did we do? We dumped the material. If we had not wet sifted, we would not have had these scarabs, along with other glyptic material, such as this. Here we have handles that are impressed with scarabs. These are very, very interesting too, even though you don't have the scarab itself. Of course, you've got great examples here in your awesome museum. We excavated 154 coins this summer. This one is Agrippa I, very common first century coin. A Brazilian delegation was there with me when this one was excavated. And so you had senators and governors from Brazil. And so they're there, and the media was there while I'm talking to this group. And right then, someone in wet sifting finds this coin. Now you understand, we've metal detected every single locus. We've excavated it. We dry sifted it, and still it makes it all the way to wet sifting, which is rare. But anyway, someone comes out and they hand me this coin. This Brazilian delegation goes wild, okay? Oh my God, and then I happen to know what coin it was. I recognized it immediately. It was a biblical coin, Agrippa I. They go wild, because they're all Christians. I mean, Brazil's got major revival going on. So in their government, these guys are all Christians. And they just go crazy. Well, the media's taking pictures of this. The next day it's on the front page, I think it was the Jerusalem Post, that rare coin found at Shiloh during Brazilian delegations. I never said it was a rare coin or anything like that, but got to make a good headline. So 154 coins just this season at Shiloh. So always interesting when we find these. If you're a volunteer on a dig and you find a coin, what do you not say? Coin, right. Everybody stops working and then they want to come look at it. All right, so of course we track all of our samples. You can see what a square supervisor is collecting: bone, flint, bioremains, shells, fossils. All these things are kept so that then we can scientifically test them and then ultimately publish them. We're in the throes of final publication for Khirbet el-Maqadir volumes 1 and 2, which hopefully both volumes come out next year, just like you guys are trying to finish up Jalul. So you feel our pain. And in the midst of that, we're already into our new dig, Gluttons for Punishment. So summary of our findings from the first 3 seasons. And I'll end by showing you a short video, and then I think we've got a couple of minutes for Q&A. This is what N. Grace and Jim Scudder produced, a 4-part series. Does it begin airing on TBN next week? A week from tomorrow on TBN. So this is just a little teaser from the episode at Jericho. So, Pastor Jim, here we are at a bush that is very important in the Bible, but almost no one knows about it. Jeremiah 17:5 says, "Cursed is the man who has turned his heart away from God. He will be like a bush, tree, shrub." The English translations don't know what to do with the word. Same way in other languages too. The Hebrew word is arara, A-R-A-R-A. This is an arara. Now let's think about that for a minute. Cursed is the man who has turned his heart away from God. He will be like an arara. So what is this like? How does this represent a man who has turned his heart away from God? Well, think about it. It's beautiful on the outside, right? It's got this gorgeous fruit, looks like a grapefruit. And when we pull one, feel it, nice and soft. All right, so
wow.
On the outside, everything looks great.
Right.
And especially think about our younger culture today. There's such pressure about cosmetically, how you
External,
look. And
right.
I mean, I'm all for look as good as you can, but don't dare trust that as a means of righteousness. Now, what happens in life is we get squeezed. And I want you to watch what happens when we get squeezed. Okay. There's nothing on the inside except a seed and poison. That white stuff, which
Really?
is now on my hands, which
Okay.
we're gonna wash off in a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
That,
I'm glad you did this illustration.
that will kill you. Now, let's read the text again. Cursed is the man who has turned his heart away from God. He will be like an aurora. He'll look great on the outside, but when you squeeze him, all there is on the inside is hot air and death.
That'll preach.
That will work.
Yeah.
The verse continues, and Jeremiah writes, "But blessed is the man whose heart is turned toward the Lord. He will be like a tree planted by a river of living water that brings forth its fruit in season." So you see the juxtaposition, the tree of death and the tree of life. It all has to do with the orientation of our heart.
And I would have walked right past that.
Well, there's, like we say, there's a lesson under every stone.
Thank you.
Let's get this poison off.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thank you for your attentiveness, and I think we've got a few minutes for questions.